Today, we're talking with Chris Jensen, also known as the Legal Writing Coach, about appropriate tone in legal communication. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Angelica.
Thank you for joining us today. So let's get to the questions. What exactly does tone mean? And how is it different from formality or register?
Tone can mean formality. It doesn't only mean formality. But normally when I talk about tone, I'm talking about formality. But we also talk about two other aspects in my workshops, which is similar to register also, how to be positive instead of negative. In other words, glass half full instead of glass half empty, and how to be more personal in your tone instead of abstract, which is another common problem with legal writing. But today we'll talk about the main aspect, which is formality.
Okay, and where does this step fall in your four-step edit?
So when I teach people to edit systematically, some people may have already heard about it. If not, most people, in fact, nobody that I've ever met ever edits systematically. And so the idea is to edit in steps, and you start with the big edit and then you refine. And so within the four-step edit, tone is the last most refined edit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you teach that the goal with tone is to make it disappear. So what exactly does that mean?
A good way to think about tone, and if I give you a story or an analogy, maybe you remember it better. And so a good way to think about it is you're getting married and you invite me, and I accept and I'm excited. And so I brush my teeth, I take a shower, I shave, I put on some cologne, I buy a present, I show up at the church on time, and I'm wearing a t-shirt, shorts, flip-flops. And in the workshop, I ask people how would they feel? What would be their emotional reaction? And it's always negative, shock, regret, uh, disrespect. And I say, well, what about my teeth? What about my cologne? What about my punctuality? What about my gift? And of course, nobody notices all of the things that you do right. They notice the one thing that you do wrong. Oh my gosh, he's wearing a t-shirt and shorts. And this is potentially what's happening with your correspondence. It's almost always email. And when you're writing an email, if somebody notices your tone, it's because there's something wrong with it. In other words, you know, think about it, get it right, get the formality right, so that it's perfect and they don't even notice. It's like me coming to the wedding in a tie and a suit, which is perfectly appropriate, and you don't even notice because it's appropriate, and so you focus on all of the good things I did.
Mhm.
I like your cologne. Thank you for the present. You brushed your teeth, etc. The fact is, when you write an email, you probably do a lot of things right.
Mhm.
And that's what you want the reader to be focusing on, not on a mistake related to formality.
It's true. But then what would be the most common mistakes that lawyers make?
Uh, I would say that the two reasons why lawyers get tone wrong are, number one, they just don't think enough about it. Uh, and therefore they don't pay enough attention. They don't think it's important. when it actually is. You know, it's not rocket science. It's not that hard to get right if you think about it. Um, or another big mistake, which is probably the biggest mistake, is legal style as a way of creating formality, or what I call manufacturing formality. Probably the biggest mistake I see, you know, using difficult style, unnatural style, legal style to sound formal, such as, for example, reference is made
Mm-hmm.
instead of I refer,
Mm-hmm.
or attached here to please find instead of I attach. Or, for example, it would be highly appreciated if instead of please.
Mm-hmm. You said it's not so hard to get tone right if you think about it, but is there a simple formula for getting tone right?
I think there is, you know, I teach one and I hope it works. You know, and a lot of people do it, but they do it subconsciously, and they don't consciously think about it. And so in the workshop, we discuss and get people thinking and get people talking. And the formula that I teach in the workshop is match what I call formality factors with tone devices.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first step we do is we talk about formality factors. And this is basically what factors help you decide on the level of formality.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's something that we do, but sometimes we don't do it thoroughly enough, well enough, such as how well do I know them? How long have I known them? How did they write to me? Where are they in the hierarchy relative to me? Who's paying who? Very important. The nature of the relationship, uh, the purpose of the correspondence, where they come from culturally, you know, what country, what background, especially relative to me, and maybe whether other people will be looking at the correspondence. All of these factors have to be considered when you're deciding the appropriate level of formality.
Mm-hmm.
And then, given your decision, you know, you decide, you implement it with tone devices. And tone devices just mean the different ways you can change the tone. And there aren't very many appropriate ways. And so there's no good excuse for getting them wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the only ways that I think are appropriate for changing the tone are probably most obviously the salutation, in other words, the opening, the title, the name, the closing. In terms of vocabulary, you can choose synonyms that are less formal or more formal. You know, chatting is very informal. Discussing is the same thing, but more formal.
Mm-hmm.
You can throw in formality, or sorry, politeness terms. Please, thank you, kindly. They don't really mean anything. They just increase formality. And then the third vocabulary option would be contractions. If you want to decrease formality, it's, we'd, I'd. And then in terms of grammar, you have one big option, which is modality. Instead of send me, could you send me?
Mm-hmm.
Could you please send me?
Yeah, it's true. Can you walk us through a practical example of appropriate tone, applying appropriate tone?
Huh. So let's quickly look at something, you know, to illustrate the idea. And so in this case, hi Hans, great to hear from you. exclamation point. Yes, let's definitely discuss your case. This week's super busy going to New York City, meeting a big client, but next week's better. How about Tuesday? Cheers, Jim. And you look at that and you immediately know, assuming that the formality is correct, that Hans and Jim have known each other for a long time. They're friends, because it's a very informal email. And the way Jim created this informal tone was with tone devices, the salutation, hi Hans, um, contractions, let's, uh, weeks, using cosmetics, super, big, instead of, no modality, this very direct style. How about Tuesday? And the closing, cheers, and the name, Jim. And so if you imagine you change the formality factors, okay, let's say that Jim is writing to Hans, but instead of friends who have known each other for a long time, it's a client who wants to talk about a case. And maybe it's a client from, Germany or Austria, someplace where they're a little bit more formal. And so Jim would adjust the tone devices to match the formality factors. And it becomes, Dear Mr. Smith, so the salutation changes, more formal, no contractions, choosing different synonyms. It was a pleasure. Eliminating cosmetics, no exclamation points, no capitalization, underline. I would be happy to discuss your case. This week is busy, but anytime next week would work for me. Are you available on Tuesday? And then you close in a more formal way. Kind regards, Chris Jensen. And it's important. Another point that I would like to mention is, once you decide on the appropriate level of formality, it's important to implement your decision with tone devices in a consistent way throughout the correspondence. So if you call him Mr. Smith, you would probably want to close in a similar level of formality. Kind regards, comma, Chris Jensen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one last thing, Angelica, no jargon, no legal style. In this email, you have been formal without resorting to this crutch of, difficult, unnatural, strange legal jargon. The point is, you don't have to choose between formality and simplicity. You
Mm-hmm.
can be formal and simple at the same time.
Thank you. This is really helpful. So to sum up, what would be your key advice to lawyers for getting the tone right?
I think the key advice that I would give lawyers is to just think about it. Understand that it matters. Take that last step before you hit send. Just like I need to take the last step before I go to the wedding. Stop, think. Oh, I need to put on a suit before I go to the wedding. And if I do, then it becomes a non-issue. And it's the same with tone. It's mostly an issue of awareness and getting into a new habit. A lot of the things I teach are not, like I said, they're not rocket science, but it's simply a new habit. Take that last step, stop, think, go through the formality factors, implement your decision, then hit send.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Chris. This is all very
Thanks,
helpful.
Angelica.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.